the pool had an AED, and they hooked that up. And for about the next 30 or 40 minutes, I had no response on anything. I got 9 shocks with the AED. I had 4 shots of epinephrine. And again, you have this situation. It's just like the movie where they're, all clear. They shock me. You have hundreds of people over on the other side praying to have me move or do some sort of response, and there's nothing happening. Absolutely nothing.
This is Andrew Petty is Dying, where each week we tap into the power of our mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live. I'm your host, Andrew Petty, and I'm dying. I hate to say it, but so are you. Imagine that you died and came back to life. How would it change the way you live? Today's guest doesn't have to imagine it. This is the first time that Joe Harsel has shared his story publicly, and if you let it, his story has the power to radically transform how you live. A clear theme emerges when you look closely at Joe's life, no matter which of several different professional chapters you examine. A commitment to investing in and serving others. Joe is a perennial optimist, an exuberant fan of everyone he comes alongside, a devoted husband and father, and someone to whom hundreds owe a deep debt of gratitude, including yours truly. It is such a pleasure to introduce Joe to you today. And Joe, you would not want me to do this, but it's my podcast, so I get to do this. And that is to say, I'm here with Joe Harsel, longtime friend and initially a mentor. And I just want to thank you publicly. You're one of those guys who, and everyone listening can think of someone or a couple or 2 or 3 people in their lives who serendipitously, in the way that the universe and God conspires with us, drops into your life for a period, for a season. And you dropped into my life when I was in high school, and you were leading Young Life, and I was part of that. Well, I guess I wasn't really, was it? I was sort of in orbit, and you saw that I was sort of on the fringes, on the outer rim of the solar system in high school. And you knew my parents, and you just sort of inserted yourself into my life and began to pull me out of my shell. And a dramatic representation of that would be the Mr. Seahawk competition that I entered my senior year in high school, which was like this beauty pageant for, I'm sure a lot of high schools did this, but beauty pageant for guys. I never would have done it had you not prompted me to do it. And I ended up on stage in a pink, like,
tutu. Yeah.
Bridesmaid's dress and combat boots, reading this jumbled up version of what was it? Cinderella. Yeah, reading a jumbled up version of Cinderella that was hilarious and was totally out of my normal wheelhouse in terms of silliness and everything. And
how'd you end up doing at that contest?
Joe, thanks to you, I won that contest. So that's just a quick example of a way that you interacted with me that caused me to begin to experience life differently and myself differently, and to begin to open up a little bit more. And I just want to publicly thank you. I mean, what a gift that was to me. What a gift that was to my family. What a gift that was to my now wife and kids, to begin cracking open the nut that was me back then. Because, as the story would unfold moving forward, there was plenty inside of that nut that needed to be brought out and aired out and rehabbed. And so to my listeners, I want you to know, the work that I'm doing right now through this podcast and coaching ties in no uncertain way back to Joe Harsel. And I'm so thankful, Joe. Thanks for taking the time and the interest and being willing to stick with a really closed up, insecure kid who, if you read the book by the cover, you would have thought it made no sense because I was the proverbial golden child in high school, but internally I was a wreck. And you really were a part of helping to connect the inside with the outside in a way that made me a more complete person. So thank you.
Well, it was my honor. It was great to work with you back then, and it's been an honor to walk with you and your family through all these years, decades.
Yeah, and I was just one of the kids that you impacted that way. There are hundreds, if not thousands, that could say the same thing about you, and that's a wonderful part of your legacy. So thank you. I know you wouldn't want me to do that, but I did it anyway. It's my podcast. I can do what I want, so I did. And a quick note, as we move into this, I'm in a construction war zone, And so if you hear anything in the background like drilling or anything like that, we're just going to keep rolling and deal with it. It shouldn't be too bad, but if you hear that, that's what it is. I know you'll put up with it in this COVID weirdness with where we've got to do all these things remotely. And I'm in my little cobbled together home studio, and you're in your own cobbled together home studio. So thanks, listeners, in advance for putting up with that. Let's get into it. Joe, 3 years ago, you had just this crazy, bizarre experience. Tell us that story. What happened 3 years ago?
It was a Saturday in July 2017. It started out like a lot of the Saturday mornings, probably for the last dozen years, in my neighborhood in Baltimore. I belong to a tennis league with a bunch of guys. We're not great tennis players, but we enjoy getting together. And so it was a normal Saturday morning tennis league. Went through and played. And then after the tennis, my son was having a swim meet down at the pool. Our tennis court is connected to our pool. So I went down to it. Now, at this point, I need to tell you and all the listeners, I really have no memory of the rest of it. This is what I've heard cobbled together from other people. But I was walking up a hill to the pool, and my across the street neighbor was walking towards me, and they said hi, and I fell face first down on the concrete. Didn't catch myself, just smacked into the concrete. They thought maybe, obviously something was wrong. Now, fortunately, about 8 feet to my right was a gentleman who heard the noise. Everybody said it sounded like a bowling ball dropping on the concrete. He recognized it and ran over immediately to start helping me. Now, in the great craziness of the universe, this gentleman was not only a trained EMT, he was actually the Maryland State trainer of municipal fire and rescue squads. So he happened to be at the swim meet. He was a dad from the visiting team, and his wife was a nurse. So he instantly called for her to go get his bag out of their car, and he started some pretty intense CPR on me. And it turned out what was happening was I was experiencing what medically is called sudden cardiac death. Not the cheeriest of terms.
Why can't we just call that like sudden cardiac interruption? How about that?
Yeah, that's right. Well, part of the reason why is I come to find out, and again, I was over 50 years old. I didn't know the difference between a heart attack and a cardiac arrest. And I had the latter, the cardiac arrest.
So this was not the version where a blood vessel suddenly got clotted because something broke loose. This was your heart just quit.
Correct. Yep. And so that is the difference. The heart attack is the heart's pumping and the blood can't get through. A cardiac arrest is the darn thing just stops.
Now, quickly, any pre-existing history, any indicators leading up to this, anything you had failed to acknowledge that maybe in hindsight, like you should have paid attention to this?
Yeah. So interestingly enough, a part of the story that needs to be told is that exactly 24 hours earlier, I had my annual physical with my doctor. And my primary care physician is a great guy. He's one of the favorite people in my family's life. But it was time for me, and I, had some questions. So I went in for my physical. My weight was down, my cholesterol was down, my blood pressure was down. Numerically, everything was looking very good. And then less than 24 hours later, I had this experience. So it was an all-out kind of just crazy scene. You have a couple hundred people at this swim meet. They're all being pushed aside, separated. People are moving my kids away, and I'm lying motionless there.
Kids, plural. So multiples of your kids were there.
Yep. So one kid, my youngest, was in the swim meet, and then my third son was coming up to watch him. My wife was actually went to work that morning. She rode her bike to work and was riding back when somebody called her and said, "You need to get to the pool. Joe's collapsed." And she thought maybe, he's just overheated. He'll be fine. But when she got there, everybody was on one side of the pool area, and it was just a small group of people working on me. The pool had an AED, and they hooked that up. And for about the next 30 or 40 minutes, I had no response on anything. I got 9 shocks with the AED. I had 4 shots of epinephrine. And again, you have this situation. It's just like the movie where they're, all clear. They shock me. You have hundreds of people over on the other side praying to have me move or do some sort of response, and there's nothing happening. Absolutely nothing.
So, literally, by all measurable means, you were dead.
That's why they call it sudden cardiac death, I guess, is that there was no heartbeat, no pulse, no oxygen moving on my own. Now, later on, the doctors, trying to piece things together, would credit this couple's incredible CPR.
Because they kept your body oxygenated.
And what they actually said was they so replicated what your body should have been doing, mimicking the heartbeat with the chest compressions, the oxygen bag. And there were 5 other nurses there, and they were emergency room nurses. It wasn't even like they were cosmetic surgery nurses. These were people who were intense on knowing how to deal with this sort of triage medicine.
No offense to cosmetic surgery nurses.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, I apologize. You're exactly right. In fact, I'd look for a reference if anybody was out there. Yeah, but it was, and so no response. Then the ambulance comes, the local ambulance, and still no response out of me. They wouldn't let my wife ride in the back of the ambulance. I think they were really nervous that, I just wasn't going to resuscitate. I mean, within minutes, people were sending text messages, and every one of them super intense. Come, to friends and family, come quickly. I think we lost Joe. People driving home from vacations. I mean, it was super intense. No response, 45 minutes. And then when I pull into the actual hospital in the little driveway, emergency driveway, all of a sudden the person runs up to my wife and says, he's awake and talking.
Oh my gosh.
And later on, one of the doctors would say, the best illustration we could give would be, it's as if somebody hit the breaker switch in your house, the main switch, and everything shut down. And then for some absolutely unknown reason, and 45 minutes later, somebody switched it back on. They ran all these tests. It turns out that the widowmaker artery, the most important one, that was it was highly blocked. None of my other arteries were blocked, which was already also a bit of a question. So they didn't quite know, did one cause the other? But again, the reason why it's sudden cardiac death is there is less than a 6% survival rate. I mean, it's crazy. And then those who do survive have some sort of cognitive impairment, usually.
And you don't appear to have any more cognitive impairment than you did beforehand.
Exactly right. So if anything, maybe even kick things in the right direction, which, and that's been a weird experience. Again, when I came to, it was not long before I was pretty similar to how I sound right now. And that was just a really awkward, really weird situation because it was so dramatic and so traumatic. I tell people I escaped with by far the least emotional trauma of anybody there that day. I mean, it was definitely one of the craziest experiences I've heard of. I was there, but I don't carry with me the emotional trauma that my family, my neighbors, my friends. I mean, imagine these people working on me. These nurses were neighbors. These were people who I went to Christmas parties with, and we, had game nights together, and they do CPR professionally, but they're looking down at a friend performing this. I mean, it was super intense.
And when we say you were gone, I mean, you were really gone because you said that your skin color changed, your temperature dropped.
Yeah.
You began to look as if you were dead, right?
Yeah, that's again, this is what other people told me. I don't have the recollection, but my wife and everybody was saying I took a gray color about me. My body temperature was colder. Yeah, it was clinically dead for 30, 40 minutes.
I want to put a pin on that trauma piece for your family and friends because I want to come back to that because that's obviously an important part of the story because, we're telling your story as a way to get at how to live our best lives now using mortality as a motivator. But your parent, your wife and your kids' perspective certainly comes into play as well and is probably, there's a lot that's educational for us in that as well. I want to take a quick pause from the storyline here and just say, you might not be able to see it, Joe, but I'm literally trembling as we're talking about this. And on the one hand, I don't know why, but I also know that when certain kinds of conversations come up, I have this physiological response. And in this case, some of it certainly ties back to my long-term struggle with anxiety because Your real life story and the scenario you just described is literally my worst nightmare when it comes to my experience of anxiety. Because that's the very thing that when the anxiety is having its way, I'm most afraid of, that something is terribly wrong with my heart. And it's just a matter of time before it's going to show up and I'm just going to keel over. And then you describe things like my cholesterol was down, my weight was down, all this would look great, my blood pressure was down. So the doctor said, hey, you're great to go, Joe, and you die the next day. And because I always want to put stock in medical evaluations that can give me some sense of security. And so I mention all that because I'm really thankful for this conversation on a personal, selfish level, because this is the kind of work that I and others like me need to do, in my opinion, in order to really grapple with the anxiety and put it in its proper place. Is to, in another episode, I talk about how, if you're scared, practice being brave. The prescription is not reduce your fear, it's build your bravery muscles. And so this is an opportunity for me personally to be doing that as I experience your story. And maybe some listeners out there have some similar fears. Maybe it's not around this kind of thing, but it's just other things. And I just want to say to everyone out there, whatever you're afraid of, turn and face it and walk toward it and get what it is, and then get braver as you do. So let's keep going with your story. You wake up, you say you're almost as lucid as you are currently. The doctors don't know how to explain it. And you and I share a similar faith orientation. And I think you and I at this point would very easily welcome the God component into this and understand this to be a miracle. But I think I would imagine even the medical professionals around you would have said, yeah, it's a miracle. We got no explanation. Or maybe they just said it's a one-off fluke. This stuff happens, whatever. What happens next? I mean, you have just woken up, been revived for all intents and purposes. You're ready to roll. Take us through the final part of that. You've woken up and you're recovering, and then you get launched back into, like bizarrely back into your life.
Well, so those who were with me on that day would be quick to say I didn't go directly back to being normal. There was a day or so where my wife would describe me as a happy drunk, that I would greet everybody super, hey, Andrew Petty is here. I'd be kind of loopy in that regard. So for a day and a half, they were happy that I was back, but they were wondering, boy, who's this we're going to be living with? One of the things that I am really so grateful for with my wife is that very early on after this experience, we made a commitment to not try to rush to explain this or to try to come up with some sort of deeper meaning or to ascribe what we think happened. You mentioned the medical community, and we live in Baltimore, Maryland, where there is arguably some of the best medical facilities in the world. I was at a University of Maryland hospital, St. Joe's, which was great. They sent me to Johns Hopkins. And the medical people who I really respected the most were the ones who said, it can't be explained. And some used the term miracle, and they were big enough and humble enough to realize that there are limitations to those sort of things. And we can definitely be frantic in our preparation and to try to create or control certain things. But there is a point where we don't know. So I definitely have appreciated not rushing in to try to explain it, and plenty of people did, or would try to. And the other thing that I thought of when you asked that question is, what was it like? Is when people would see me and I'd be talking like this, they'd say, "Oh, so I mean, you're back to normal now, right? Everything's fine." And I'd say, "Well, not really. I mean, I had some major surgery involved. This was a pretty shocking experience, but people just weren't comfortable with something that was unsettled."
They needed you to be better.
Correct. And definitely people needed to know if my weight was down, cholesterol down, blood pressure was down, how in the world did this happen? Because they were they were banking on the fact that these other things were going to help them.
They were running their own algorithms to see how they were.
Yeah. And I don't completely have this figured out on how to process this. Something that I do stick with, and in fact, probably has come up most pronounced from this, is the idea of embracing mystery. And my family has really grown comfortable with that. And that's not a common thing for people to be comfortable with. I remember I had a grad school professor who said, if something appears to not be true or not be right, it's going to be one of three things. It could be a contradiction, which is like A does not equal B. It could be a paradox, which is, things like the way up is down. The way to understand life is to understand death, which would be a good podcast concept. And then the third option is that it's a mystery. And only the first one, the contradiction, is false. The other two, they're not false. We just don't understand them, or they don't seem to make sense. And there's especially, again, you mentioned the idea of us coming from a faith tradition. That's a really uncomfortable place, which is funny that it's called a faith tradition that's really uncomfortable with mystery a lot of times. We want to be able to have a clear understanding and an explanation of things. And there's just a lot of things that don't fit that criteria. And we don't know. And through this situation, there's plenty of things we don't understand, and they were mysterious and still are, and we're growing comfortable with that.
This is fantastic, because being comfortable with mystery means opening yourself up to a level of insecurity about your knowledge of yourself and the world and the way that it works. Each of us has our own unique response to that. Some of us might recoil from that encounter with mystery and go back to trying to solidify a sense of security, when in fact, I think your story, if it does anything in particular, it especially highlights the fragility of things that we think we can find security in, like blood pressure readings and cholesterol readings and yada, yada, yada. Well, in your case, it didn't mean anything. You still keeled over and thankfully lived to tell the tale. How did you and your wife, Carol, come to that point where you agreed that we are not going to push for meaning or understanding? What led you to that? Because clearly it's been useful to you, but it seems like an unconventional or an unexpected way for a couple to approach this in that moment.
That's a good question. I'm going to say that the experience was so incredibly overwhelming that it created a humility that blew past all of the concept that up until then you'd walk around with saying, oh, I think I got this figured out, or oh, this must be what's going on here. It was just so shattering and overwhelming that it did cause, a real quietness in us. I think we've lived long enough that you've heard people explain things and then it plays out not like that, and you think, well, that person was just trying to fill the air or fill statements, and we didn't want to be guilty of that. But you're right. I think a lot of people are incredibly uncomfortable with not having an understanding, turning over a sense of control.
Well, I like your language there. You turn over a sense of control, because my conviction is that, and I don't think this is the same as surrendering to the whims of the universe, to say that I don't think there is such a thing as control. And you might say, well, I can control my thoughts. And to that I would say, well, I mean, maybe you can control your thoughts to a point until you have some sort of brain injury. And then guess what? You're not even in control of that. And one of the things that I hope we're doing on this podcast is helping people to confront and dismantle this illusion of control, and then begin to move toward the greater freedoms that exist beyond that sense of control. And I think what you're describing is, and I think the greater freedom exists because when you're operating with an awareness that we don't have control, then you're operating in alignment with reality, as opposed to trying to reinvent or re-engineer reality to fit your needs. When we can do that, then we can begin to really live in alignment with reality and with guts and gusto and abandon, where before so many of our efforts, consciously and mostly unconsciously, have been on avoiding that really dangerous feeling thing that gnaws in the back of our hearts and minds and tells us that life is a lot wilder and more chaotic than we would like to admit, and some stuff you can't explain. What has been the impact on you and your family of opening yourselves up to this idea of mystery, to this reality of mystery? What's changed for you guys?
I would say, because I can't speak for everyone in my family,
Hmm.
I would say as a family, this experience has been a really beautiful thing of bringing us close together. I mean, I think it is hard to move away from this idea of um, thinking that a certain sort of action creates another sort of action, or that there is connection. I'm not ready to dismiss that completely, but I do think that there is much more openness to us keeping a place at the table for something that we don't understand. You know that sentence or that phrase about if a tree falls in the forest and nobody is there to hear it, is it really making a noise?
Yeah.
First of all, I'm always curious. It does still make a noise, right? Isn't that kind of the point of it? I mean, I think that's what that means, even though we're not there to hear it. But so I phrase it like this: if God was going to do something amazing, but just didn't tell us about it, would it still be happening?
Hmm.
Now, there's a lot of people, and I've had some pretty high-ranking religious people even say to me, well, I don't understand why God would do that. Why wouldn't God want us to know what he's doing? Well, I don't know why he wouldn't, but there is a possibility. So the correct answer would be, well, yes, of course. If something amazing is happening, but we just don't know about it, it's still happening, which then, of course, begs the next question. So how do you know that's not happening right now? And so I do think in our family, there is an acceptance, and there's, like I said, a place at the table for things that we don't understand that wasn't there before, which can be unsettling. It can be unsettling, but at least you know that it's a possibility. And I think, again, the theory of it is easier to grasp than the reality of it. I think a lot of people are experiencing it now with the COVID thing. You don't know. We didn't even know what this was 6 months ago, and now it's upon us. And it's so vague right now. We don't understand it, and yet we still have to carry on our lives.
So that's a good application. Let's use that as a case study. So this greater openness to mystery for you, how do you feel like you might be responding to the COVID situation and all the unknowns and uncertainties that come with that differently now than you would have before this ordeal?
Interestingly enough, I might say I'm generally an optimistic person. People that know me would say I'm generally an optimistic person. Admitting that I'm still working through this, I would probably say I am more open to the negative possibilities than I would have been before. I think I would have been more in the camp of, oh, what's the big deal? If I just plow through it and don't think about things, they're not going to happen to me. But I think now I do realize, and you have other things in life, not just this incident. All of us have situations in our life where we look and say, that wasn't how I thought things were going to turn out, or I wasn't expecting that. I think I'm more open to the fact now that that's a much bigger list of possibilities than I ever thought of. So now, that being said, what do you do in the midst of that? So let's say you're an optimistic person who all of a sudden has far more negative possibilities in your head. Or if you're a person who's prone, again, like I've got 4 sons who I'm raising, and each one of them is handling this differently, both my accident and how do we live with the mystery of COVID-19. You mentioned the idea about control. I still have got to believe that we still do have control. It's just over less than what we worry about. And we need to whittle away what we're worried about that we don't have control over to the most minute things that we do have control over that day at that minute. And I would say that's something I've taken in the last 3 years, is I whittle down my moments hyper focus to what I'm doing at that very second.
So your list of potential catastrophes has gotten much longer.
Yeah.
Your awareness of the utter unpredictability and chaos in the world is much longer than it used to be. And at the same time, that awareness and this experience has caused you to really zoom in really closely on, okay, yeah, the list may be longer. My awareness of the fragility and the unpredictabilities may be longer, but I'm going to discipline myself to only have on my list of things I can control a certain few, right?
Right.
What does that feel like within you to do that work on a daily basis? How aware are you of it?
Yeah, so I'd say I'm more aware of it. Interestingly enough, I would say I am. Now, in fairness and in complete openness to this being, I'm still working through this, like I'm not nearly as good as I wish I was at being able to appreciate things. Let me share this interesting observation I had. I wanted to thank the people who responded right there, and I couldn't think of how to thank them adequately. I wanted to take them out for lunch or dinner or something. And so in my mind, I started to piece together this idea of, okay, well, what if I had died? What great events in my life would I not have experienced that in the next month or so when I didn't see them, that I was able to have, that I wanted to be able to thank them. One of my sons entered college. If I had not made it that day, I wouldn't have seen him go to college. We went on a great vacation with some friends and some family members that if I had died, we wouldn't have had that. And then I started whittling down the days of the great things to thank this couple for. And this idea struck me. I literally was having once in a lifetime memories every single day of my life that I had never noticed. I wasn't paying attention. But now, if somebody is paying attention, you can have a once in a lifetime memory every single day. And just, if you're not paying attention, you miss it. I would say I do think of that all the time. There is not a day that goes by where I don't stop. Like even today, this podcast, you and I being able to reconnect, you saying those incredibly warm words to me. I mean, that is something that'll stick with me forever. And anyone who's a parent knows when you ask a kid, well, what was your memory of this or that? They'll come up with things that you don't even think you're remembering. But every single day, there is an opportunity for something that could have a lifetime worth of memory. And so I do love that. And so my wife and I'll catch myself all the time. We'll be sitting outside, be a beautiful sunny day, and we'll just say, are you kidding me? Look at what we have today. Look at this. I mean, how did we end up with this, nice house, this nice neighborhood, a refrigerator that has cold drinks inside of it? I mean, there's so many small things now. It is completely that sort of cliched, you experience the little things, you're appreciative for every day. I do love that. And it's the sort of thing I want to be able to continue to be and to have that sort of a mindset.
Of course, you went through this crucible to come by that new mindset. What avenue is available to those of us who haven't gone through a similar crucible like that to really embrace that perspective on a regular basis? What would you recommend? How do we do that?
I don't know. And I've actually asked you this about your podcast. So professionally, I'm a financial planner. And so our job is always to prepare people for things and avoid bad situations. But I heard a great line after this last market correction that reminded us that preparing to get punched in the nose is a completely different experience than actually getting punched in the nose. And I've said that to you. I don't know how do you create this urgency of mortality, this urgency of your life, without somebody having a really close experience like that? I do know that even in my profession, some of the best planning work that I do starts with asking people to look at their mortality and just imagine if you suddenly got a diagnosis that you only have a few years to live, what do you want those years to be about? And then some of the best people even speed up the timeline. What if you only had a month? What if you found out that this time tomorrow would be the time? And then not only are you looking at your money in my position, but you're looking at the emotions and the unresolved things. I just think that's a healthy experience. I think most of us, when we go to funerals, think about things like that and wonder what our funeral would be like. And so, again, that was another, I've shared this with some people. That was, that was a neat experience that came from this. It is a common question for people like you to say, what would you want somebody to say about you at your funeral? I had mobs of people who thought I had died. They started traveling to come see my family. I made it. And they just happened to still be in town. So I had a tremendous gift of hearing people share things. And it was a powerful experience. I mean, it was powerful to hear what they did say, what they didn't say. I'm incredibly grateful And honestly, I was actually surprised that I was not more caught off guard with like the, oh crap, this was a wake up call. I really
Mm.
need to get my life together.
Mm.
Now, all that being said, I feel like I went through, as a grown up, I went through some pretty significant dark nights of the soul and dealt with some things earlier on in life that I'm glad I tended to. But it was a powerful experience. And your original question of how do I get other people to face it, I don't know. I mean, I think the older we get, even since that day 3 years ago, I've already had dozens of other people pass away who I've known, and so you're confronted with it all around us.
Even if nobody was tuning into this podcast, I think having had the experience of producing 10 episodes so far and had these conversations, I would keep doing it. Because what I find in my own life is that these conversations, when I'm able to have them on a weekly basis in the podcast and in the graveyard group environment, the masterminds that I lead, which has a similar emphasis about using mortality to become the people we were made to be and live the lives we were made to live and not put it off. I live more intentionally, more purposefully, with greater gusto, and abandon because of this podcast, because of the graveyard group. And so what that teaches me is that short of going through a crisis moment that leads you to these difficult things to wrestle with in life, we can embrace a practice and a discipline that keeps us in contact with the reality of our mortality, that approximates the effect of a crisis. But it does have to be a discipline and a practice, and an intentional one, so that when the inevitable storms and crises of life come, we've already been expecting that, and we've been living as if it's coming, not in a fearful posture, but in a, hey, it's coming. And so what's more important to me today than other things, and how can I make sure that I'm giving that some attention?
I do remember my very first reaction when people would say things like, well, what did this do to you, or how are you feeling? I do remember saying, it is amazing how far certain things have dropped down my worry meter. Things that I used to be really worried about.
Like what, just for example?
Advancing professionally, having somebody recognize me around the community. I don't want to say like things like, does my house look good? Does, my boss have a good opinion of me? And those aren't unimportant things. But if you could speed up that sort of an experience for a person, and like, for instance, here's a silly one. I have people in my office every day who are stressed out about what the stock market is doing. And I'll say to them, hey, do you know what the stock market was doing that week that I was in the hospital? And they'll say, no, I don't know. I'll say, well, neither did I. It was the farthest thing from my mind. And I do this professionally. Like, there's certain things that, right? And why is somebody obsessed about it? Well, maybe they think that if they have a certain amount of money, there's a certain amount of security or a certain amount of control. Well, at that time, that didn't make a single difference. And so I do think there's a value to, and in my life now, I do have the ability to go back and say, okay, this thing that I'm putting a lot of worry or stress into, if suddenly tomorrow I had another one of these cardiac events, would it have been worth my energy? Would it have been worth my effort? And that is what I mean. A lot of things have dropped off because of that. Rushing to be at this place, rushing to position myself one way or another. And a lot of it is, again, like I think it could be healthy for people wanting to know, I'm trying to build sort of a reputation or what people think about me or my legacy. I want to be known as this, and this. But having experienced it as closely as I did, I was able to see what things did actually contribute to what I wanted people to say about me, and what things I had poured energy into that gave no results or no feedback of what people would say.
Share with us the top 2 or 3 bullets on those lists, the things that did contribute, you see more clearly now, to the kind of life you want to have lived, and those things that didn't contribute. What are the top 2 or 3 on those 2 lists?
Well, I don't know which list you want me to start with, but I would say relationships. I mean, again, one of the things that this experience has made me come to peace with is growing comfortable using cliched responses that I never would have liked before. But I do think whenever I get a chance now to come alongside somebody that, and specifically if it's someone who I've had history with, I want to do that. And it is amazing the dividends that pays in the other person's life that can't be taken away. And you were very gracious in mentioning a personal experience. But it is amazing how isolated or lonely certain people are. So if you can come alongside them, it does have a really powerful effect. The other things that I would say were not as important had to do with things where I thought maybe I'd be advancing my career, or I would think that extra couple hours of work would produce a great benefit that maybe a boss would notice or something. But it didn't. It was a lot of those things I was doing were more for my own story of what I wanted to hear about myself or think about myself. So I think growing comfortable with relaxing has been a big thing for me. Actually, a huge thing for me, which seems to go counterintuitive to the idea of live every day, is I think I'm growing much more comfortable with calling it a day when I don't feel good and just saying, tomorrow's going to be a new day. I don't need to keep pushing through.
What is that about? Because some of the folks who might listen to this podcast might also tune into other ones that tell you your morning routine ought to be this. You're up at, the sun better not be up when you get up. So you're up at 4:30 and you need to push yourself exercising hard. You need to crank out all of your, unimportant emails before the day starts. Then once the sun is up, you can have your coffee, you can visit with your family and, find ways to 10x your productivity. And you're saying something very different, having had a real encounter with mortality. What do we do with that? Because there's so many competing narratives.
So the funny thing about that is I definitely would have been in that kind of a camp of people who loved the dictated morning routine. Also, the surprising thing about the mystery is I definitely would have come from the cognitive thinking, all my like Myers-Briggs, Enneagram things are all from the mind. Yeah, so I don't necessarily know what I'd say to each person because each person is different. I would say when I followed things like that, there was a message about myself that I really liked.
What is that message?
Well, that message is I'm the kind of guy who doesn't waste time, or I'm the person who can overcome inertia of this to do such and such. The problem comes when somebody doesn't live up to that, when something makes you not do that. Then you really do have a crisis of, well, am I not a good person, or I don't have what it takes, or is the system bad? So what I would say to that person who says, well, this is different, we have to live within every single one of those days. And that's part of the things of what we can control. Like, for instance, I'm not at all too proud to admit, for 6 months after the experience, when I would go out to eat, I would order whatever the heck I wanted. Because you thought, well, why am I putting this off? I want dessert, or I want, a milkshake or whatever.
So a little bit of that eat, drink, and be merry.
Exactly right. Yeah, because yesterday I died. But
oh my gosh, that's so bizarre, Joe, that you can say that. That's mind blowing. Okay, keep going. Sorry.
But however, you do still end up living with what that person feels like. So if you overeat, you do wake up the next day feeling sluggish, awkward. And so you do have to deal with, what am I living with that day? And am I comfortable with that? I am a huge believer in the morning routine and the morning check-in. And sometimes I do actually, sometimes I'll use an illustration like the Truman Show, where, like everything was fake except him. And I ask myself, okay, if I'm the only person that's real today, like what is most important for me? And what do I feel is, I'm doing this because I feel like this is what my mission for that day is. I absolutely believe in the morning gather yourself mindfulness idea. But I would also say that a lot of those things that are hard driving, and I tried to do some of them professionally, they didn't pan out the way you thought they would.
This is, I think, a really useful train of thought here, because I think many of us go through life trying to find a system, a process, an approach that we can kind of put on autopilot. If I do this morning routine, then I will get X and Y results in due time if I just stick with it. And then we begin to try that approach and find, for a variety of reasons, either I can't stick with that, or it's not getting the results that I wanted, and we get really frustrated. And I think it highlights a flaw in our expectations, in our thinking. We want to resolve a tension that exists and will never go away. We want it to make it go away. I want to take away this tension of having to make decisions on a daily basis about the better of two courses of action or the better of two uses of my time. I don't hear you, for example, advocating for, hey, everybody, I almost died, and guess what? I'm still here, so eat, drink, and be merry. Because tomorrow you may die, or in your case, yesterday I died. You're saying if I overeat using the eat, drink, and be merry mentality, guess what? You still feel like crap.
Yeah.
So there's still consequences there. You're not saying go do that, everybody, because I've been there and back, and I'm telling you, just do this. You're still acknowledging the tension that exists even after having that experience, and you're saying it's not that easy. I think at least part of what I'm taking away is be present in your day. Be willing to acknowledge what your mind and heart and body might be telling you, and be willing to weigh what your mind, body, and heart are telling you against other things that might have competing priority or want attention, and just continue to stay in that tension of making decisions on a daily basis, doing the best that you can. But the normal experience of a life lived intentionally and purposefully will be one full of tensions. Is that right? That might just be my stuff. That's a big thing for me, is trying to manage the internal tensions I feel on a daily basis, because on the one hand, there's maybe my body is telling me and my mind is telling me, Petty, you just need to chill for a little bit. And I'm also seeing this objective I've put on my professional or personal horizon and going, but if I don't spend the next 3 hours working toward that, I might regret it. So there's a tension there. Do I acknowledge and do what I think my mind and body are telling me, or do I shelve those indicators and push through it anyway? That would be a common example for me on a daily basis. And I think part of what I want to say is it's hard because it is hard to make those decisions. And there's a tension inherent in life that just comes with life. So don't try to resolve it. Just get better at managing it and learning over time.
Definitely well said, and that's wise.
Comma, but.
Okay.
I'm ready for it. Bring it.
No. I 100% agree that most humans seek to be on autopilot. No question. And that is what's unsettling about the mystery idea, or when curveballs happen. Now, I would say what you just described is unique to a lot of people. There's a lot of people, when they feel a tension, they just plow through, and they don't let themselves think. They don't wonder if what they're doing is true to themselves. Or the other option is sometimes they give up, or they just say, well, look, I must not have it in me. I'm not disciplined. But I do think that idea that you said of managing it, and really, again, I mean, it comes down to the nanosecond, if we can, of just saying at this moment, what is the truest of myself? You're connected in a faith relationship where you're like, okay, God, what is this next step? You won't give me 20 steps, but I'll take the next one step. And that's actually why I've grown comfortable with this idea of calling it a day if I don't feel like it. Is I trust the next day I will feel more like it, and darned if I don't. So I've grown more comfortable with that. But I do think the idea of the autopilot robs us of life. You're absolutely right. And there's plenty of people, I'm a couple blocks down the road from you, and there's plenty of people my age who have been on autopilot and are now like, wow, this wasn't where I thought I wanted to go. Or what's even crazier is you made all these plans for one thing, and something made it not work out. Or the way that the story is told comes out differently. So that's something we need to be prepared for. I mean, at the turn of the decade, I ask these people, I'm a professional, I'm a professional planner, and I say, okay, think back to where you were 10 years ago. Okay, do you remember where you were? Do you remember what your job was? What was your family like? Okay, so fast forward to today. Would you say that your experience was nothing at all like you expected it to be, totally like you thought it would be, or sort of? I mean, virtually every person was like, I never would have guessed what what is here today. I never would have counted for this. I'm in a different situation. My family's different. And that's only 10 years of our life. You have 80 years, God willing. I mean, that's just so funny that, and my job is to plan for people. But 10 years, we have no idea what's going to happen. We don't know what's going to happen. 6 months ago, none of us knew coronavirus. Yet now it couldn't be affecting our lives more.
Joe, one of the things that I think you've demonstrated so powerfully with your life is the power of human connection and relationship. And that's why when people began to gather for your anticipated funeral, and instead they ended up having a nice visit with you, you were able to enjoy people's appreciation of you because of your impact in their lives. And I think one of the big takeaways for me, and I hope for the listeners, is simply the priority of human connection and relationship. If there is any security in life, if there is any comfort in life, I think most of it can be found in the power of human connection and relationships. No matter what arena of life we live in, let's imagine it's business. Well, business is at the end of the day about the quality of the human relationships that exist within it. Family relationships, interpersonal relationships. And I just want to encourage and exhort our listeners that if you lack human connection and deep personal relationships, now is the day to change that, to come out of your isolation and whatever is holding you back. It doesn't matter what it is, because Joe has been to, quote, the other side and back, and found that his investment in human relationships before this event yielded him essentially an obituary that he was proud of. You even told me before we talked that you realized when you heard these things from people, you realized, had I died then, I would have been happy with the life I'd lived. Is that accurate?
Yep, that is correct. And in fact, I don't mind saying I'm fearful of how my ultimate end will be, because there's no guarantee that it will be as good of a timing as that last one was, which is a weird thing. But you're right. And I will say I was caught off guard by that. I was surprised by just what a wonderful place that was.
So if you're listening and you feel like your life is deficient in this area, please don't let another day go before you begin to take a step in the direction of connecting more meaningfully with someone. And if for you connecting meaningfully has always been a challenge, then find someone that can help you take those next steps, whether it's a professional, a coach, a therapist, a pastor, or just an older mentor, someone that can help you begin to connect. Because in my opinion, and I think, Joe, you would affirm this, that is where the comfort, the security, the safety net in life lies, is in the power of our connection with other humans who are going through this same strange existence that we call life on earth.
Add to that, to kind of bookend some of the things that were said here, a fear of connecting with people, or kind of a danger, is that feeling that you need to rush in and make sense of what somebody is going through. And you don't need that. Like, to be able to trust in the mystery of presence with somebody. You don't have to share something that's wise and insightful. You don't have to help somebody who's confused untie the knots for it to be a very helpful time. People don't need answers as much as they want somebody to walk through questions with. And I think that's something I feel more comfortable with. I am the type of guy who would have rushed in before to give some sort of comment or solution to somebody. But I'd encourage your listeners on that.
And I think in the context of authentic human connections and relationships, we're able to hold the mystery of life together more comfortably. In other words, when we're all together in something, that togetherness allows for the terror that the mystery can bring to be present without it driving us to extremes of behavior. We can be together, acknowledge the mystery, be in awe of the mystery, even be afraid of the mystery. But when we do that together, we can persist in the mystery. And I think part of what you're telling us is that life has this huge component of mystery. And in order to engage life more fully and to be more fully present as humans, openness to that mystery is imperative. Your hand was forced a little bit in a way that it hadn't been before. But I think in the context of meaningful human relationships, we can experience and hold that mystery in our lives without shrinking back from it.
That's well said, and I wouldn't have thought of it until you said it like that, but that is exactly the season of opportunity we're in right now. There's not a person on this planet who is not affected by the mystery of this pandemic. And that is a shared vulnerability. It's a shared mystery that we're all in together. And so I do hope that from this experience, there are those deeper connections that families have and people have if they're willing to go there and accept that.
We haven't come back and talked about the impact on your family. I think for the sake of time, we'll leave that to another conversation because I think it'd be fun to have another conversation. Give you a few more laps around the sun, more time to process and soak in your experience, and see Joe 5 years from now to see what's transpired. But I do want to ask one final question, and that would be, if you could perfectly package and bottle and deliver intravenously to each of us a lesson from your story that you hope will capture more than anything else, what might that be?
I mean, I would definitely say, do the work that you need to do. Don't put it off, whether it's internal or with other people, which I think serendipitously I found out I'm grateful that I did, but you don't ever know. Again, it sounds cliched. You don't know. Life is short. I'd still say I'm not 100% sure what I would say. And that is part of it. I don't want to reduce what I would take from this.
Perfect. Then don't. Let us all just hang in the mystery, because that's where you are, and being comfortable with not knowing in the ways that we would like to know is an important part of growing as a human. I remember one of my favorite times to just sort of muse about the universe is when I'm driving to this regular business event that I have, where I'm there for a week and I have about a 4-hour commute. And it was just one of those moments when some seemingly disconnected thoughts sort of all came together at once. And I realized that, for me at least, and extrapolating it to the rest of humanity, we like to think that knowledge is a destination. And I think you and I, coming from a similar faith orientation and the theologically fine-tuned context that sometimes emerge from that, the pastor is meant to have an answer, chapter and verse for everything that we experience in humanity. Oh, and I can help you understand why this is that. And it helped me reorientate myself to the idea of knowledge, that knowledge is not a destination. Knowledge is an openness and an orientation and a process that we go through throughout life. We might at some point be able to say, I think I know this thing to be a little bit more true than this other thing. But if I stop there and put my foot on it and say, I've now established that is non-negotiable, I'm going to move on from there, then we close ourselves to continuing to grow and evolve as a human. But I think a lot of us are very afraid of that openness, because I think some of it's ego, some of it's needing to establish ourselves as credible or useful or something. We want to say, no, I know this without a shadow of a doubt. And never has the saying, never say never, been more meaningful or useful to me, because I might think I know some things now, but give me another day and it might look very different. And so I just want to propose that the listeners, to the degree that they need to, open themselves up to this idea of mystery and of not knowing, and acknowledging that we don't know as a key to then knowing more. I think that's pretty critical for us in growing. So, Joe, thanks for not taking the bait and trying to give us a really tactical, practical answer. I appreciate that you responded the way you did.
The one thing that did come to mind since you asked that question is my advice to all of your listeners: do not let gift cards sit around too long.
Love it.
If you have a gift card, cash that thing in you, because you never know.
There you go. So in summary, I want to ask our listeners, what are you pinning your hopes on? Are you hoping that if I work out 4 days a week at CrossFit and I eat a plant-based diet, that I will live to 98 and be, disease-free? Are you hoping that if you just put in this work, you'll get that promotion and then have this level of financial income? Now, this is not the same as to say don't have goals, don't have objectives, don't have dreams, don't work hard toward things. But it is to push us a little bit and to say, are you pinning your hopes on those things? And if so, let Joe's story tell you that there is no security in those things, as we like to believe there is. So what are you pinning your hopes on? And I would like to encourage us to really think about, if we pin our hopes on anything, this side of our transition from our earthly life into the next chapter, whatever that might be. Let it be in the context of human connection and relationship. Let that be the safety net you create for yourself and for your family. Let that be a non-negotiable part of your legacy. And it doesn't have to be impacting hundreds and thousands like Joe's life already has. It can be simply in your family. You know, I had my boys last night because my wife had an event at our house, and my tendency is a somewhat intense, anxious, perfectionistic INFP, using the Myers-Briggs lexicon, is to, when I'm with my boys, is to try to have some deep developmental experience. But last night, I didn't do that because I decided that time in the presence of my boys, enjoying silliness and pizza and a Star Wars game on Xbox and pretending there was an anti-gravity machine on our big bed in our bedroom, and them doing, that 3.5 hours for certain made an impression on them, and it did on me, because we just lived together and we're silly together, and nothing significant, quote unquote, happened. But I would say that very much that had significance happened at the same time. And it's this kind of a conversation that's encouraging me to make those kinds of decisions in those moments, instead of trying to push for the deep win, the big developmental thing, and to believe that that's time valued. Because Joe, you said just time with people is valuable. There's no such thing as an ordinary moment. Every day of our lives is full of extraordinary moments. Joe, thank you. I think this may be the first time you've shared this story to a larger audience.
It is.
And thank you for that vulnerability and reliving something that for you and your family, I mean, there was pre this and there was post this. Your life and your family's life can be measured very much that way. So thanks for your vulnerability and your wisdom and your honesty and serving our listeners in the world in this way. And I wish you all the best, and I can't wait to see you in person.
Yeah, me too. Well, thank you, Andrew. I haven't shared it with others, but I completely wanted to do it out of my friendship and love for you. So I'm grateful to have the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. All right, listeners, you are going to die. And it might even be really soon, but you're not dead yet. So become the person you were made to be. Live the life you were made to live. Guts, gusto, abandon. Let's go for it, guys and gals. Life is short. There's a lot yet to do. Over and out. On a scale of 0 to 10, how comfortable are you with life's mystery? Share your score on the post for this episode on Facebook at Andrew Petty Coach. My purpose as a coach is to help you deploy your unique purpose in the world. Connect with me on Facebook at Andrew Petty Coach, or email me at andrew@digdeepwinbig.com. I'll help you create the life you know you were made to live. To learn more about the Graveyard Group Masterminds, where you tap into the power of your mortality to become the person you are made to be and live the life you are made to live, visit digdeepwinbig.com/the Graveyard Group. I'm so glad you tuned in today. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time on Andrew Petty is Dying.